Startropics really benefited from the video game reviewer boom of the mid-2000s. I guess Nintendo would have re-released them regardless with the Virtual Console, but people were more than willing to publicize these games themselves through the power of the internet. Video after video, personality after personality, recalling childhood memories of a game that, God, I hadn't heard of until I was in my earliest of adult years. Startropics barely got a release in Europe, and with the Master System's grip on the continent, it probably wouldn't have stood a chance, even if it had a large push. Startropics wasn't released in Japan, so the only region it really had a chance of an audience was North America. But that audience, oh boy. In retrospect, much like the Mothers series, they have a real commitment to letting people know they care about it.
This is not just a forgotten classic, it's a forgotten classic made by Nintendo themselves!
And that is Startropics, one of my favorite games on the NES.
This game's always meant a lot to me.
Although the series was short-lived, the Startropics games are really good.
And that's great, you know, not every game of 700 and something can stand out, and not every game can succeed, even with a huge push. I would say Startropics did reasonably well, but was left behind in the wake of the Super Nintendo. The series would forever be bound to the NES, never to be seen of after Zoda's Revenge. I first played it when I was about 23. I beat it through an emulator and loved it, however ragingly frustrating it was. With Nintendo Online's Netflix-like access to NES games, I got the chance to play through it again and see where I stand half a decade later. So how is Startropics? Mike Jones, a name I couldn't make more American if I tried, has landed on Diet Dr. Pepper Island to find his uncle, who has been kidnapped. You need to go find him, so, do that. It's simple, but actually the story gets so surreal down the line, it becomes uber fascinating and appealing due to just how much the goals change near the end. I'm a big fan of how it starts off as a standard NES fare storyline, save someone who has been kidnapped, and it ends up being some crazy UFO twist, like Indiana Jones was playing this after the first 3 adventures, and going, write it down, write it down? But to summarize the simple yet twisting story, it's awesome, quirky, and whimsical, and I like it. So Startropics gives off a very tropical, adventurous vibe, and yeah, that's pretty much on the mark. Startropics takes huge chunks of Zelda's mechanics and style and repurposes them. Control-wise, you have the overworlds, where everything is basically Zelda/Dragon Quest, and then you have the dungeons, which are, well, kind of Zelda with maybe more restrictive controls. Honestly, Startropics reminds me a lot of Castlevania, where people complain about the controls not being able to change directions once you've dedicated to the jump, but I think because these two franchises base their games around that concept, it works perfectly. Startropics feels great and just takes some getting used to. It is just adjusting to its rules. This place looks super lovely and warm. I'm all about the relaxing vibe it puts out at the start. So when you enter town, it's almost like it magnifies in. Being in the island overworld looks a lot smaller and less defined. It's kind of like Zelda 2. A yo-yo is a really cool, very imaginative, childlike weapon to have as your main form of defense. I love that. The first dungeon was actually surprisingly easy, considering what I remember. Startropics' first few dungeons display little difficulty, really. As long as you understand how to attack the boss, the dungeons themselves are full of easy enemies, little will threaten you. It's only later where Startropics really starts to pick up in difficulty. I wouldn't say it's the enemies themselves, more so the accumulation of them per room and the bosses, which becomes a little harder to discern how to tackle the bosses as the game goes on. I have to say, if you were less inclined to explore the overworld, regardless of how linear it all is, you may find the game a lot harder, considering they do hide hearts around the world. If you didn't have those extra hearts, I don't know what to tell you. I imagine it could become unplayable at certain parts. As much as Startropics continues to become more difficult, its sense of childlike wonder doesn't diminish with more lush environments, animated characters, and silly little scenarios which hints at the idea that the developers knew what they were doing. Startropics very much succeeds at what it is attempting. Everything comes together very well. Technically, the music is a great mix of joy and childlike terror. Nothing is here to scare you out of your wits. It's more trying to create the feeling of a cartoon with some moderately high stakes. The compositions are all well made and take advantage of the sound chip. They aren't going to become your favorite songs on the NES, but they are more than serviceable. You could sit and just jot off note by note the technical specifications, but I just don't see the point. Startropics benefits from heart and soul more than programming behind it. I think it is why, in a low percenter way, it endures to this day. Yo, Rob, what up? Dressing up as a woman to gain access to your destination. Genius. Mike Jones, pure trap. Tumblr, don't add me. Reminds me of Moby Dick, which reminds me of Leviathan. So in conclusion, I'm going to go listen to Leviathan. Oh, by the way, there is no dungeon in this chapter. I kind of like that. There's a great amount of dungeons in this game. One chapter of pure story and overworld is quite alright by me. Oh yeah, this code is a thing. I mean, no one cares anymore, but yeah, if I'd have rented this and was withheld from progressing, I'd be pissed too. We are getting close to the end of this thing, so here's a little story. I grew up in Europe, and as such, I was also one of the very few of my friends to have an NES. Actually, that's a lie. None of them did. I mean, when I was like 5, there was a kid at my school who had an NES and Dr. Mario, but that was his only game. Everyone had a Master System or a Mega Drive. In my early 20s, me and a friend got into playing these old games we never got to when we were kids, but knowing about the whole 50/60 hertz thing was a fucking nightmare. Predominantly because there was no console mod to make your NES output 60 hertz. Regardless, we weren't buying PAL games, we were buying NTSC. A big advantage of this was that it was cheaper, just import NES carts from the US. Me and my friend both got a copy of Startropics a week or two outside of each other, and found it very funny once we both had our copies that within this small ass town we lived in, existed 2 copies of a game that was barely released in Europe, Forget Our Town, and that it was the US version. Hey, Uncle, oh, aliens. Well then, I'm off to an alien spaceship. See you guys soon. Tom DeLonge would have fucking shit his pants if he played this as a kid. This game gets hard. It's really rough around this point. I personally advise save states if you're a rational human being. Zoda's a little bitch and I won. It's probably been about 5 years since I first played Startropics. It feels like a lifetime, honestly, and weirdly enough, I do have a real fondness for the game. I look back at that time and remember it vividly for the situation in my life and the game itself. It's a cheerful game, it's carefree, and it's super difficult. Startropics is for the adult who loves a good, childlike, whimsical experience. Startropics will always be one of the best games on the NES, and I feel like everybody's nostalgia for the game is pretty much warranted. You should definitely play Startropics. I certainly didn't regret it the first time, and don't regret it this time either.